Is Machina Arcana worth your hard-earned gaming dollars? Come on back after the break for my full review of this 1 to 4 player cooperative game. Hey everybody, welcome off the shelf board game reviews. This is a YouTube channel dedicated to the tabletop gaming hobby, and if you enjoy the content I put out there, make sure you like and make sure you subscribe. This channel is 100% sponsor free, which means that everything you see here comes out of my own pocketbook. I don't have the luxury of Kickstarters or sponsorships to help me bring out this content, so your subscriptions and your likes do definitely matter. Also, you'd help keep the channel growing strong by just tossing $1 in the tip jar over at Patreon. Patreon.com/OTSBGR. But let's go ahead and get into it, and let's look at Machina Arcana, a 1 to 4 player cooperative game of Lovecraftian horror, a story-based game, a chapter game, a game with a whole bunch of different stories, but very strongly influenced by the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft. Now, if you're not familiar with the game of Machina Arcana, well, go check out my other videos in the video series, but if you want a quick overview here, this is a cooperative 1 to 4 player game of exploration. Players are going to take control of a hero, and your basic objective is to go through a story. And this is a chapter-based story where every single chapter is going to tell a continued storyline with a very thematic text, changing different goals and different objectives, and different ways to explore this ever-expanding map and this maze of tiles as we're trying to work through these objectives to complete this storyline and get to the, well, let's just be honest here, it's H.P. Lovecraft. We're fighting Mythos creatures, we're going against a grand storyline. Whether it happens to be inspired by the Mountains of Madness or various different things, you know what we're doing here. We're going after the Mythos creatures, we're trying to feed them while trying to keep our sanity, or in this case, just trying to keep our lives all the way to the end. Now, Machina Arcana does play for 1 to 4 players and is a fully cooperative game, but the game does have player elimination, which means that players are going to die. Now, the good news here is when a player does get eliminated, they do get to start controlling the bad guys, the villains of the game. So that does mean that basically when one player gets eliminated, since the AI is going to get a heck of a lot smarter, it probably means that the rest of the heroes are pretty much hovering on death's door too. So I do like the aspect there that the game does have that intrigue and that pressure of making sure that you want to work as cooperatively as you can, making group sacrifices as a group, because once that one player is eliminated, oh yeah, things are going to get really rough very, very quickly. Now, Machina Arcana is an extremely thematic game. The game is designed to be played across these grand storylines, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers here, so I'm going to be very, very vague. I want to explain these storylines to you. But the basic idea of the game and what is so interesting about this game, because most of the mechanics here we've kind of seen before. We've all seen dungeon exploring games where your basic idea is you're just moving across a dungeon. Bad guys are going to come out, they're going to bash down the doors. Oh wait, let's put a door here. Now the bad guy can bash down the door. Okay, the door's been bashed down, they're going to come over there, they're going to try to gobble up our heroes. We've seen this kind of stuff. We're going to gain treasures from treasure chests, cool different upgrades that will allow us to upgrade our heroes. We may get consumables. Yep, we can use the consumables. We're going to have stats, we're going to level up, we're going to have hit points, essence, the ability to do different things. We're going to move, interact with the board. Bad guys, we've seen all this stuff before. What is interesting and what's intriguing about the game of Machina Arcana is this game has some stories built into it. The basic game comes with 3 individual stories, and these stories are chapter based. You're going to go through various different chapters which have some extremely thematic text on them, and they're also going to modify the way the game plays. So every single time you play the game is going to have a lot of different variety in the way the game is going to play out, because you have many different things working towards the amount of variety that comes in the game. Unlike games such as using, just as an example, the game of Descent. Every time you play the game of Descent, basically the only thing that's going to change up is the map tiles. You're always going to have the basic objectives and a couple different enemies are going to come out. This game has a different flow, and the way it does is because the way the things all come together. You have a flow because the monsters are going to level up. Not the individual monsters, but the monsters you're going to encounter are going to start leveling up as the story goes. The game is going to change as you're going to interact with the board, and as you're going to go through this, the board tiles are going to come out in different ways because it's going to be randomized. But additionally, you're also going to have the randomization of the actual chapters themselves, because they are going to have different requirements, and they're going to change how we need to interact and how we're going to advance the storyline. But on top of that, we're also going to have these horror cards. And these horror cards are also going to come out every single round, pretty much, especially if you roll the dice the way I do. And these are going to add extra thematic text, but the interesting thing is they're going to also add additional challenges for our heroes. Again, that adds to the variety. So while the game only has 3 storylines in the base box, understand that not only do these individual storylines have slightly different endings, and they're going to evolve slightly differently, but there's a lot of replay variety built into the game based on the amount of monsters, the amount of different heroes which play differently, the way the horror event's going to come out, the actual good events, and the way the monsters are going to come out, and the way we're going to level up our heroes. So it's kind of an interesting switch over the things that we've seen in your typical dungeon crawlers, where it's a very stagnant thing, where either the board is always laid out the same and we kind of learn the objectives that way, or the storylines are pretty much the same every single time. Well, it adds a little bit of variety in that aspect by changing up those little things. If I was going to compare Machina Arcana to anything out there, I would say this is pretty much feels like a good hybrid of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Not 3rd Edition, 2nd Edition, one of my favorite horror games of all time, especially when we're talking about horror-themed games. But this feels like a combination of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition mixed with a little bit of Mansions of Madness, and I'd say Mansions of Madness 1st Edition, because this is not an app-based game. It kind of combines both the aspects of those 2 games and kind of modifies in some very interesting ways to kind of create a different hybrid. While we all know that a lot of the Arkham Horror, the H.P. Lovecraft, those all style games, they all have a very strong, very similar theme to them, a very strong, similar feel to them. This game is a little bit differently because it takes a lot of the strong story elements of the Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, where you feel like you're fighting against horrible little events and Arkham H.P. Lovecraft style events. It also incorporates more of a dungeon crawler. But unlike Mansions of Madness, which feels like a dungeon crawler, which is on smaller tiles where you don't have as much movement, and it feels a little bit differently, this one feels like it's a much more grander aspect. You feel like it's a much more sweeping event where you're going to do various different things. And the storyline, again, I'm not trying to give away too many spoilers. I would love to give story spoilers here because it's going to emphasize my points here. But I'm trying to stay as spoiler minimalistic as possible here. But the way the story is going to evolve makes it feel different than Mansions of Madness. This game really feels like Arkham Horror and Mansions of Madness had a baby, and this baby grew up to be Machina Arcana. Now, a lot of H.P. Lovecraft-inspired games usually kind of move along a spectrum here. They're either going to be very luck-based, or they're going to be very overly controlling when it comes to the storyline here. That's one thing I do appreciate with Machina Arcana. While I do feel that the storyline is kind of evolving, I also feel like the game does give me options, and it gives me different ways of evolving through the game. Now, of course, I have to admit, yes, the game does use dice. There are dice involved in the game, but the dice aren't quite as bad as I've seen in some games, especially games that require you to roll like a 5 or 6 on D6 to even land a hit or get a success. Arkham Horror. But this game has a way of making you feel like the dice are not quite as punishing. That's one thing I do like about the game. Plus, I do also like that the stories do feel like I'm going to get options. Again, trying to minimize those spoilers here, but your objectives in every single chapter are not always the same to advance the storyline. I like that. It kind of gives me a feel of agency. While some chapters will say, this is the only way you can advance. Some chapters may say you have to do this to advance. Some of the chapters are going to say, well, you can do this, you can do that, or you can do that. But just remember, every one of these is their own individual sacrifices, and if you don't know the storyline that well, that does mean that, well, you may have just impaired yourself or caused yourself future challenges that you don't know about unless you play through these stories multiple times. And that is going to kind of impair the replay variety of the game just a little bit, because going through the stories and kind of knowing what the next chapter is going to bring can kind of influence how you may play the game. It's not going to make the game easier. No, it's never going to make the game easier, because you still have the challenges of how the monsters are going to come out, how the horror events are going to come out, and just how the dice can sometimes be a little persnickety and be a little bit challenging for you. It's still going to keep the story challenging for you, even though you kind of know how the story plays out. So it is kind of nice to say that this game is not as much of a luck fest as I've seen with some of the H.P. Lovecraft inspired games, but it's also not as totally controlling as I've seen with some of the games which have a very rigid storyline where you have to play that story exactly as the game dictates. So it kind of walks a nice balance rope there between the two extremes, and I really do appreciate that. And it does mean that the game does have a has a learning curve to it. The stories, as you play through the stories, the first couple of times, just take the first story, Horror in the Ice. There's a couple of decisions you're going to make that when you make a decision, you go to the next chapter and you go, ooh, yeah, that decision, yeah, that was not really a good decision. I'm going to have a heck of a time beating this next chapter. Next time you play through it and go, yeah, I know the next chapter is going to do this one thing, so let me go ahead and prepare for that, and I'm going to have a little bit better challenge of going through there. So the storyline kind of feels like the storyline's kind of being your opponent. The luck of the dice kind of feels like they're being your opponent. But I've never gone through a play of this game and felt like, yeah, I lost because the dice basically hate me, or I lost because the story was just absolutely impossible. It's a nice, fine balancing act, and I do appreciate the level that Machina Arcana managed to achieve there. Not many of these HP Lovecraft-inspired games kind of have that advantage, and they did a really good job here. Now, speaking of the 3 stories that do come with the base game, this is going to be probably a positive or a negative, how you really feel about things right now. Having 3 stories in the game is good. These 3 stories are good stories. They do have multiple chapters, and they are going to play a little bit differently. But having only 3 stories in the game does diminish the replay value of the game. Now, I was a backer of the Kickstarter for the most recent Kickstarter, which is the To Eternity Kickstarter for itself, and this Kickstarter came with a total of 7 stories. To me, that does feel like a lot more about where a base game really should be in this day and age. A base game with only 3 stories in it, while I could say that the stories do have a little bit of variety, you're not going to play these 3 stories many times. I mean, the game itself is fun to play, but after you play the 3rd story, the 2nd or 3rd time, you're going to want more. And just in the base box, having 3 stories, you're going to be really wanting. Getting 2 extra expansions does give you a total of 4 more stories, giving you a total of 7, and that feels to me where the meat of the game goes right there when you have that many stories. Also, adding into this aspect, and I haven't covered this yet, but the really interesting thing is the 2nd expansion, the To Eternity expansion, actually adds some really cool, interesting things in the game that kind of elevates the amount of variety in the game, minimizes the amount of luck in the game, and those are some really interesting changes to the game. So if I were to talk about just the replay variety that comes in the very base game of this game, I would say, yeah, it's not really as high as it could be, especially for the cost of the game. I know that in this day and age, components are getting expensive. I know shipping is getting expensive. I know artwork is expensive. And I do have to give props here. There are 10 tiles that come with the base game. There are a lot of these horror cards that come with the game. And I'm not kidding here. You're going to see that tons and tons of horror cards that come with the game. Now, these are the horror cards you would use if you played in the Horror on the Ice. If you go through one of the other missions, you're going to take out some of these. You have the base cards. You're going to mix in some new cards. You play with a 3rd mission, yes, you're going to add in the variety here. Yes, there's a lot of variety here with the amount of heroes, and there's a lot of variety in here with the way the monsters are going to come out. But having 3 base stories in the base game does feel a little bit limiting. I would highly suggest that if Machina Arcana looks like a game that is going to interest you, it looks like a game that you are going to enjoy, and you enjoy these HP Lovecraft style games, these cooperative games, get both of the expansions. The 2nd expansion is good. The final expansion is really good, just for the fact that it adds a minimized, again, try to minimize the spoilers I'm giving here. It reduces the amount of randomness, luck in the game. It gives a little bit more variety, and I'm just going to leave it at that. That's some of the bonuses that extra final expansion brings, and it does bring us up to a total of 7 storylines that we can play through. And that, to me, seems like a basic, really good start for a game like this. An H.P. Lovecraft-inspired, story-based adventure game that makes you want to have more. And I really do hope there's going to be more expansions for this game. Of course, in a way, I do kind of feel like a hypocrite by saying all this stuff because I was one of the lucky people who did back the Kickstarter here. And by backing the Kickstarter, I only had to pay $100 plus shipping. And I got both of these expansions. I did get the base game, and I got all this wonderful amount of gameplay for $100. And for me, that actually feels like a really awesome price point for this game. Unfortunately, at this point, there's no Kickstarter available for the game anymore. And if anybody wants to get all of this gameplay I'm showing right here, you're looking at about $160. And that's where we're starting to feel a little bit of the squeeze and a little bit of the tightness and a little bit of me saying, I have a little bit of trouble recommending the game at that price. Not because I don't think the gameplay is there. I just think $160 for a game that is a lot of cardboard is going to be a little bit of a hard sell. Now, I know, like I've said already, I understand that the design of this game is just a one-man show. This isn't somebody who has Asmodee behind them who can print out 10,000 copies of the game and get the price marked down really, really quickly because the publisher is managing to order so many copies, which means the manufacturing costs are going to go down. I get it. I understand the shipping costs are really, really high, but I also understand that I'm a consumer. As a reviewer of board games, I'm not one of those people who gets tons of free games flown to my door on a daily basis where I'm opening up tons of boxes and I'm putting out 10 10-minute video reviews of these games. No, these are games I'm buying. I'm a consumer just like you, and when I review a game, I look at a game review as a consumer would too. And if I would have to sit back and pay $160 for this game before I even played it, I would pause, I would hesitate, and I go, do I really want to spend $160 on this game? After playing this game, yeah, I probably would. Actually, no, I'm not going to say probably. I would pay $160 for this game very, very begrudgingly because I do understand the logistics and everything behind the game. And I definitely think there's a value for the game here. But a lot of your consumers out there are going to look and say, okay, I can pay $100 for 3 stories. That doesn't sound like a lot of replay variety. I can pay $160 to get all the expansions for the game and get 7 stories, and that does seem like a lot, but wow, if I'm spending $160, what else can I get for $160? And you're going to sit there and you're going to ponder all that, and that's going to be one of the struggles I think Machina Arcana is going to have when it's trying to break in the thought process of your average consumer. Yes, there's a lot of great gameplay here. Yes, there's some really great writing in this game. Yes, there's a lot of great components, fantastic artwork, and a lot of variety in the game. But again, that $160 for pretty much what you want for this game, it's a hard sell. And yes, I admit it. But I'm also going to say, if finances are not an issue for you, if you're not somebody who has a strong need to balance a budget, and you're not somebody who would rather spend $40 or $50 on a single game, $160 is definitely worth it for what you're going to get from Machina Arcana for the full package. Get the expansions. I highly would like to say you want the expansions. If you're going to get Machina Arcana, pay the full price for that, or wait for the next Kickstarter. Now, there's a lot of things that I can give some really high praise here, and there's a couple of things that were kind of annoying, a little bit persnickety for me when it came to the game of Machina Arcana. One of the best things I can highly suggest here and highly say that I really appreciate is just the fact that the game plays very, very well. I loved how the stories evolved. I loved the concept of the chapters. I thought the chapters was a phenomenal idea where you flip over each individual page, gives you a little bit of artwork, and it kind of advances the story without giving you away any spoilers. I thought that was great. One of the things that I really don't like about story-based games is when you kind of have the whole story presented to you from the beginning, it kind of minimizes the enjoyment of evolving the story. The chapter idea is really cool. I really appreciate that. I also like the fact that we have multiple heroes. I like the fact that the monsters are going to evolve as the storyline evolves. As your decisions go, whether you're taking too much time, that's going to cause more powerful monsters to come out. And the monsters are really cool because I have to give credit to the designer of the game. The monsters match the Mythos theme very well. The abilities of the monsters really kind of fit H.P. Lovecraft's Mythos extremely well. For example, Night Gaunts, when you fight a Night Gaunt, when you fight them, they're going to pick up our heroes and they're going to take them back to a spawn point. Kind of matches the idea of the Night Haunts by the way they act. There's also some monsters like the Yithian? No, I'm feeling a little rusty on my H.P. Lovecraft. But there's monsters in here that go ethereal. That kind of fits the Mythos. So the monsters are designed to fit the Mythos really well. I thought they did a great job of that with the design. Also, the stories themselves feel very H.P. Lovecraft inspired. Horror in the Ice has a very strong Mountains of Madness feel to it, so it feels like the design is there. I feel the theme of the game coming through, and I feel it when I'm playing through the game. That's very cool. So theme is there, design is there. It's a great cooperative game for 1 to 4 players, and I'll talk about the player count here in just a second, the positives and negatives of the various player counts here. But I do want to go over a couple of negatives of the game here. Now, these are not negatives about the game itself. I think the game is designed very well. It's more about the thought process that went behind the design of the game. And one of the first things I want to say is I don't like when designers want to use funky, weird, thematic words to design various game effects. It makes it hard to learn the game, and I know this is a me thing, but it drives me absolutely crazy. Don't call a discard pile a destroyed pile, because in my brain, destroyed means something completely different. Don't tell me to invoke something. Tell me to draw a card. I get it. I know you're trying to use thematic themes to make the game feel more thematic. But for me, when I'm trying to learn a game, it drives me absolutely nuts because I have to reprogram my brain, because I'm a gamer who plays a lot of games. I own a lot of games. So when you're giving me a new lexicon, my brain just does 360s and it just drives me nuts. On top of that, we have a game that uses a lot of symbols. If the game just used weird words once in a while, I would be okay with that. I'd say, yeah, you're trying to get thematic. But when you have weird words and you mix those weird words with a whole bunch of strange symbols, now my brain just gets super frustrated, because every time when I'm just playing the game, the first couple of times, every time a new ability comes out and you look at it and say, okay, Let's look at this card. Okay, this symbol means stamina. This symbol means range. Okay, this means the black die. That means the white die. Okay, I get that. Now this is an arcane attack. So arcane attack goes ahead and uses willpower. Okay, I need to know that. Okay, so this is in a white box, chat box. So white chat box means that this means something different. And now this says destroy. So destroy means, okay, that means remove from the board. Okay, but it drives me nuts. And yeah, I get it. I appreciate that they're trying to make language independence here a thing, but in a game that has this much text, I don't think these symbols are making that much of a difference when it comes to language independence. And all it did was make the game a little more frustrating. Now, the positive behind that is, once I learned the symbols, it wasn't that bad. The symbols started making sense to me. But I will tell you, the first couple times I played this game, I doubted myself so many times. I was wondering, did I play that right? Did I play that right? Did I play that right? No, I played that wrong. Okay, now let's pull out the rule book. Let's go and look everything. Let's check everything. Okay, that looks right. Maybe. Okay, I hope I did wrong. Okay, guys, let's just pretend we did this right. Let's keep playing the game, and then when we come back, we'll go ahead and fix that later if we played it wrong, because this is a long playing game, and that's the next thing I want to cover. This game does play very well for 1 to 4 players. When I say it plays very well for 1 to 4 players, the balance is there. There are some times when I'll play a game where a 1-player game feels way too easy or way too hard. Way too hard, I just reviewed a recent game where 1 player was a lot harder than the higher player counts. This isn't a game that's like that. Lower player counts and higher player counts, difficulty-wise, I never felt like that affected the game. I felt like the game difficulty was there because there's mechanics built in to keep the difficulty raising up with higher player count and keep the difficulty lower down on the lower player count, keeping it balanced there. And just to go on a segue here, I think it's awesome that this is a true solo 1-player game. This isn't a solo game where you have to play multiple heroes. 1 hero can go through, and if you watch my playthrough videos, I take 1 hero all the way through the entire horror in the ice there. So that is very, very cool. What I want to say is going to be a negative for a lot of players out there is this game does have player elimination in a very long playing game. Now, I play through the entire horror in the ice campaign, and I think it's got to be about 4 or maybe 5 hours, and I play it as a solo game. Yes, I understand that I'm doing a lot of talking, kind of like I'm doing this video. Hey, it's my thing. I like to talk a lot. I think it's something I enjoy doing. If you like that, well, if you don't, just hit the fast forward button and make me speak at 2 times speed. It gets to the video quicker. But I think if you have a game that plays in 4 to 5 hours as a 4-player game, and it's a game where you have player elimination, and when the first player gets eliminated, that's fine. They're going to take over the monsters. But what happens when you get your 2nd player eliminated? What happens when you get your 3rd player eliminated? Then you're going to have 1 player left over at the end who's basically fighting against 3 other players. One of them, it's kind of controlling the bad guys. The other 2 are kind of bored. Now, I do have suggestions on a way to fix this. Play better. Play better as a cooperative game, because this is a game where you, as a group, need to be making group sacrifices, because you need to understand as you're playing the game does have player elimination if you don't have players who are willing to make group sacrifices. What does that mean by group sacrifices? Well, for example, if you have a chapter that requires you to give up 4 health, don't pick one of the heroes and say, hey, Bob, I need you to give up 4 health. Yeah, I know it's going to kill you, but hey, that's so the rest of us can go through the game. Don't do that. Every single player give up 1 health. That way you ensure that the players as a group are being weakened as a group, instead of having the group where 1 player goes dead and then the other 3 players keep going. Yes, it doesn't mean you need to play differently. You need to change your mindset as you play this game. But I understand that some players are going to get heartburn with the fact that this is a game that can play 4 to 5 hours with player elimination. And once that 2nd player gets eliminated, you're going to start seeing that there's not much for the players to do. Change your play style, play differently, change up your strategies to make sure that basically when 1 player gets knocked out, you should be at the point where all the other heroes should be pretty much close to dead anyways. Now, I know I said the game does play 4 to 5 hours, but I am going to put a little caveat in here that even though these games do play 4 to 5 hours, from what I've seen, and again, I've not gone through all 7 adventures. This is one of those rare times where I did a review where I didn't play all through the adventures. I didn't do that because I want to experience Machina Arcana. I spent a lot of money on the game. This is a game I'm enjoying quite a bit. It's a game I want to play with my friends. So I have not seen 3 of the storylines here. I'm going to tell you right now, there's 3 storylines out of the 7. I have no idea about them. I'm not doing any spoilers. I'm not fanning through them. I'm not ruining it for me at all. So the other 4 stories I'm going to tell you that I've seen, they have breakpoints. They're very nice, easy breakpoints where it's easy to say, okay, everybody, we're about 2 hours into this. We're at a break point where I see in the storyline where we can stop. Let's go and put everything away since we don't have time to keep playing. And next time everybody comes over, we're going to start on chapter Not giving away spoilers, but we're going to start on that chapter. So the game does have breakpoints. I do appreciate that, and I think the designer intentionally built the game that way because it definitely feels it, and I think that's a very good positive. Now, I know I've already mentioned basically a $170 price tag at this point for anybody who wasn't fortunate enough to back the Kickstarter in the past. So basically, you're looking at $170 for the game to get everything you want here. And again, I'm going to reemphasize, get the 2 expansions. But basically, what you're getting for the $170 is actually really nice for most of the components that come with the game. I appreciate a lot of things that were done for the components of the game. Of course, I always appreciate engraved dice. Engraved dice are fantastic. You never have to worry about the awesome looking dice, especially ones like these that have these cool symbols on them. You never have to worry about them rubbing on, and I do like that a lot. Additionally, I appreciate the fact that these are double layered player boards. That means that you don't have to worry about the pegs moving around. You can easily move the pegs. There's a nice slot for all the cards. I really greatly enjoy double layered boards. The map tiles themselves, they are all double-sided. The artwork on them is very cool. The boards are all different. They have different layouts, meaning that you're going to have a lot of replay variety, and it's going to keep the game very interesting and very fun. And also, I think it's very cool that there's also end-game map tiles that are specific to certain missions, meaning that the final tile is going to be that specific tile, and I like that. I like the fact that the game has a way for you to evolve through the exploration, and the tiles allow you to explore that. The artwork is great for all the individual monsters. It looks great and everything. There's just a couple things that I really would have liked to have been better. For example, while there is this super duper awesome double-sided cheat sheet, and there are 4 of them that come with the game, that basically, if you know how to play the game, I'm not going to lie to you here, I'm going to be perfectly honest. If you know how to play the game, this is all you need to play the game. It's awesome. They did a fantastic job with this cheat sheet. The only problem is, this is a thin piece of paper. So thin that when my box arrived, since all 4 of these are just sitting in the box laying flat, one of my pages is completely crunched on the whole left-hand side. It looks like the box went in and the slid in and crunched the whole half of the corner, so it's all basically crunched in. It would have been nice if this would have been on thicker paper. That would have been absolutely very, very fantastic. Additionally, and while the game does come with a really good insert, of course, there's that thinner plastic, which means I ended up having to use tape because this started cracking once I even opened the box. This was not designed perfectly enough to hold enough of the monsters, so you basically, if you want to hold all the monsters, you can't put them in the bases. They're not going to fit in the insert at all. You basically need to put the insert or the monsters inside the slots without their little bases, which means you can just store these separately. It would have been nice if the insert would have been designed just a little bit better so I can keep these bases on the monsters at all time and keep them completely in this compartment. That would have been nice, but of course, you know, I'm basically just splitting hairs at this point. It is nice that there's a good insert. It all fits back in the box and holds all the components very well. Yes, there's not plastic miniatures for the game, but personally, I'm really getting sick of plastic miniatures. I'm perfectly happy with standees. You know, I have so many things to paint in my life at this point that I could probably live to be 500 years old and never get everything painted. So I'm actually quite happy with the standees. The cardboard, for the most part, is thick. I have not had any problems with the boards warping at all. Matter of fact, since everybody always wants to know, do the boards warp? I'm not squeezing anything. That's the amount of warpage I've had, and it's really, really not that bad. Look, not squeezing. You see no warpage at all. And I've had this game out for about 10 days now, so this has been out in the open for 10 days, and there's no warping, not for the components, so I'm really, really happy with the value of the components. They did a really good job. Some minor things with the player aid, too thin of paper, and the insert itself could have been a little bit thicker plastic, but, you know, just do what I did. Use some of the plastic duct tape and wrap around the corners because they're going to crack and break very, very quickly. Other than that, it works out just okay. Of course, if I could give some feedback for the next, I hope there's another Kickstarter for this game with the next expansion for this game. If I can give a little bit of feedback, I would love it if the player boards would have 2 more slots. Basically, 1 slot for armor and another slot for your current maximum willpower. Because one thing I did get a little bit frustrated with is when you're playing the game, you need to add up the current amount of value of your gear on your abilities to see what your current armor value is. So for example, if this hero is equipped with these 2 pieces of armor, I need to do the math every single time, and this is annoying if I want to play solo as a 2-hero game. And you go, okay, I have 3 armor, plus 1, plus 2, I have a total of 6. And I need to do that constantly. It would have been much, much better if every one of these player boards had 2 more rows, 1 for armor, where I can constantly track the armor, and then a 5th row where I can currently track my current willpower stat. It would have been so much better if I could have had that, but that's really literally the only change I would have loved to have seen with the game. Add in that, and I'd be absolutely 100% happy with all these components. Oh, and thicker paper for this player aid. Other than that, it's really, really good. What's my bottom line here with Machina Arcana? Machina Arcana is a fantastic evolution of the H.P. Lovecraft style games. It's a good blend of Arkham Horror style gameplay with Mansions of Madness gameplay and a story-based cooperative 1 to 4 player game. I highly recommend the game if you're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft or Mythos style games. I highly recommend the game if you're also a fan of cooperative games for 1 to 4 players. The only negatives I need to give you a warning about is the longer playtime, up to 5 hours, player elimination, but there are ways to get around that, and also the fact that to get the full experience of the game, you really need to get all the expansions to get those total of 7 missions or the 7 storylines to get the most amount of replay, get the most amount of enjoyment, and they get the most amount of fun out of this 1 to 4 player horror themed game. It's a long game, but there are ways to make it shorter. It's a true solo play game. Yes, this is one of those games where you actually just play with one player, not one of those solo games where you're playing solo, but you're controlling multiple heroes. The components look great. Player aid needs better card stock, and that rulebook is just an organized kind of wonky. I know I didn't talk about it much, but this is one of those rulebooks as an acquired taste. Thank goodness that there is a really good player aid, but again, the quality and the card stock of this player aid could be a heck of a lot better. We all love theme, but don't make it a barrier to learning the rules. I'm trying to put this nicely, but it's just a pain when you have words that are just so obtuse and makes it hard to learn how to play the game. And this isn't a cheap game, but considering it's self-published, and for those lucky enough to jump on the Kickstarter, it's actually a really good deal. We were able to get the game for $100, and I think with enough requests and enough popularity and enough people wanting more from the game, I'm willing to bet this is a game that will be back on Kickstarter, especially if we ask the designer plenty enough times. There's plenty of replay variety with the built-in mechanics to add changes to each mission, but it needs more than 3 stories in the base box. Again, get those expansions. I love how the chapters evolve, the narrative, and keeps your first playthrough of each story full of surprises. It's a nice touch. And there is player elimination in the game, but you need to play to keep everyone alive as long as possible. So when the first player dies, then controlling the bad guys isn't as painful for that one player, and it doesn't create as much of a negative because you're playing smart, you're playing cooperative. Well, you're probably all close to being dead anyways. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll definitely answer them as quickly as I can. And also feel free to email me off the shelf board game reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll do my best to email you back as quickly as I can. If you enjoy the content and you enjoy the videos I put out there, think about tossing $1 in the tip jar over at Patreon. Patreon.com/OTSBGR. Just $1 in that tip jar. Remember, I'm 100% sponsor free. It all comes out of my pocketbook. I'm not looking at free games. I buy these. I'm a consumer just like you. $1 is a great way to say thanks. If you enjoy this video, if you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.